2019. Boeing's Defence India Managing Director has said that it has secured orders for major military platforms and aligned itself with the Make in India initiative over the years. He also said that they are committed to making India a maintenance and repair and operations hub soon. Public sector banks' non-performing assets associated with the Mudra loan category have declined to 3.4% in the 2023-24 fiscal year, is what Nirmala Sitharaman, the Finance Minister, confirmed. This marks an improvement from 4.7% in the previous year, the COVID time era, to now it being 3.76%, which was in 2018-2019. UPI transactions in the first 3 months of the current fiscal year have gone up. They've grown by 36% to 60 lakh crore. 41.2 billion UPI transactions worth 60 trillion rupees have taken place just between April and June in 2024-2025. Deloitte India has said that India's expected economy is expected to grow at 7 to 7.2% in the current fiscal year. It is going to be driven by the robust economic fundamentals and the continuity in domestic policy reforms. Now, let's shift focus to the big story on the right stand. Now, it's been over 24 hours since Sheikh Hasina's fall from grace, from being the longest-serving female head of a government to having to flee her own country. The former Prime Minister of Bangladesh finds herself in India now with an uncertain future. Close to 5 decades ago, Sheikh Hasina, remember, found shelter in India for a safe haven for herself and for her family after her father was assassinated. Then she stayed for about 6 years before she could return home. Is history repeating itself? Will India remain a pit stop, or will New Delhi have to bite the bullet on giving her refuge? Now, that's not the only question that stares at New Delhi. Is there a bigger plot, a bigger threat that lurks around the corner? Should India be wary of what's happening in Bangladesh, because the final aim perhaps is to hurt India itself? Well, we say that because the Pakistan-China axis seems to be working overtime to try and use the situation to their advantage, or perhaps even created the situation in the first place. Today, when External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar briefed politicians of all parties about what India's stance is going to be, he neither confirmed nor denied an outsider role to the unrest in Bangladesh. This is what we've learned from our sources within the intelligence establishment here in India, that the ISI activated the Jamaat student wing to escalate the crisis. ISIS-backed Jamaat got secret funding from time to time as well. Instructions to Jamaats from Pakistani mission in Dhaka were sent out, is what we're learning. Pakistani embassy allegedly asked protesters to take shelter there as well, and that was seen as pretty unusual. Now, the ISI, we're given to understand, wants an anti-India government in Bangladesh, and it looks like they're well en route to that mission. The ISI-backed BNP, the Jamaat and the Chhatr Shibir worked to dislodge Sheikh Hasina. The ISI sought Awami League's removal to create ripples not just in the country of Bangladesh but in the neighbourhood as well. There were sleeper cells that worked full-time, perhaps overtime in Dhaka as well. There were secret investments that were made by ISI is also what we're learning. The attack on temples especially and the Hindu community in the last 24 to 48 hours is meant to whip up that anti-India sentiment, something that India is cognizant of as well. Now, Pakistan may not be the only player here. Sources tell us that United States and the UK too could have played a role. Now, Hasina was not keen on supporting the West. She's been at the receiving end of criticism from the United States multiple times in the past. So what we've learned is that the script of her ouster was perhaps written by these Western powers. The key coordinators in the West managed a social media campaign against Sheikh Hasina specifically during elections. They were the ones that were behind the army's movement. They started this fake narrative on social media, which was in respect to elections that were held last year. They were not free and fair was the narrative that was being set on social media. Another strategy, as per our sources within India's intelligence agencies, is that to keep the region unstable is the plan, because that will create problems eventually for India. India's rise as a global power is something that the China-Pakistan axis cannot digest. Now, this is where Beijing adds to the mix. Top intelligence sources told CNN News 18 that strategic control of Bangladesh was becoming important not just for China but also for the United States. Now, Sheikh Hasina was caught between those two, and specifically their expectations from her. Sources say that Bangladesh rejected America's demand to build an airbase in the country. United States wanted Bangladesh to come out of China's BRI project and sign the IPEF, but Sheikh Hasina, in fact, worked with China. Despite what she saw was an insult recently during her China trip, where the red carpet was not rolled out to her, her demands were not really met, but she ended up signing at least 21 agreements with China during that trip. Americans allegedly also felt slighted when Sheikh Hasina purchased 4 Airbus planes for Biman Bangladesh Airlines against Washington's wishes. So what next for Sheikh Hasina and for Bangladesh? Now, what we know so far is that an interim government is going to be at the helm of affairs, but for how long? Hasina's rival Khaleda Zia was released from house arrest. She is now free as per an order from the president's office. Her party, the BNP, is also one of the key stakeholders in the next government. External Affairs Minister of India S Jaishankar today told the Parliament that Sheikh Hasina had requested approval to come to India for the moment. The highlight being for the moment, and that request was made at a very short notice in the wake of the turmoil there. He highlighted that her stay in India perhaps is short-lived. But where would she go from here? She's still in India over 24 hours later. Her US visa was revoked some time back. The United Kingdom wants nothing to do with her. So what really lies in the future of this 76-year-old politician? And until she's here in India, India's borders continue to remain on high alert. Joining me on this broadcast, Brahmachalani, Strategic Affairs expert, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, former DG of Infantry, Raymond Vickery, Senior Associate, Vadvani Chair in US-India Policy Studies, joining us from the United States. And journalist joining us live from Dhaka is Nadeem Kadir. Nadeem Kadir, let me begin by asking you. You know, we're seeing the kind of interim government that's shaping up there. We already know who the chief advisor is going to be, the Nobel laureate there. But this entire narrative that these protests were not necessarily organic. You know, what we're seeing in the last 24 hours as well, the kind of thuggery that we've seen on the streets of Dhaka and other cities, they can't just be students. This is not just the students who are celebrating. There's definitely more to that.
No, definitely. You're quite right on that point. In fact, you have to look at two things here. One is a long 15-year iron-fisted rule by former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Her departure this way is very unexpected. I think, as a journalist, I have been observing there were a lot of loopholes there in her decision-making and other things, which gave her opponents a big hand. And lately, the handling of the student quota protest, and that was really mishandled. And the killings, you know, there was a huge lot of deaths there, which really turned around the Bangladesh society against her. I can tell you this much. I could not find people saying anything positive on her after the deaths of so many students. So that's on one hand. So there's a lot of anger and there. And then again, of course, when you say that students did not. In fact, the students around were trying to stop this vandalism and this arson and looting. But students have been appealing to all not to go for arson. Today, the former Prime Minister's official residence, Gana Bhavan, has gone under protection of the army. The Parliament House, the National Parliament House, was also attacked yesterday. That is now under control partly by the army and the Prime Minister's office. So we suspect a great deal that there is a hand, and that hand could be the Islamists, the Jamaati Islami, which Sheikh Hasina banned only a week back, and saying that they were involved in terror activities. And the recent turmoil, she blamed it on her, on the Jamaati Islam itself. So one cannot really deny it, because the students are in charge of the whole affair. They were the key people who brought about the change. But if you see the crowds on the road, they are all from all walks of life, men, women, and children. So there is two sides to this whole thing. And I think Sheikh Hasina failed to feel the pulse of the people, and especially the mishandling of the quota issue gave her opponents a very good opportunity to tug in and get what they want. So we are now closely watching, because the first meeting with the army chief of politicians, the Awami League, which Sheikh Hasina leads, were not present. And we are now watching what kind of people with what kind of background are being selected for the interim government. That will give everybody, not only me, but for India also, it will give a idea that what is shaping up, and then you can talk about the geopolitics and other things. But on the other hand, Sheikh Hasina really played her cards very well with the powers, including India, regarding her friendship with China. She maintained, how she was very close to India. So China was a development partner, and she was taking the opportunity because it was giving a lot of money for her mega projects. So now we are kind of waiting to see how the interim government is formed and how and where we go. But for the moment, security is a great issue for every citizen of this country. There's no police because the police are on strike. They've lost a lot of their men in this turmoil. The police stations have been attacked, and so we are worried about security most of all.
Absolutely, and this pro-China tilt that we perhaps could see in Bangladesh, or the Jamaat now there perhaps taking over, it's all but official, Brahmachalani, many would say. Where does that leave India? Now, Sheikh Hasina is still here 24 hours later. There are lots of countries in the West that have washed their hands off her. Is New Delhi, is India in a catch-22 sort of a situation? What do we do from here on?
Well, first, there's a dangerous power vacuum in Bangladesh. That power vacuum can only be filled with a politically broad-based government. The military is now back in politics. It's back as the dominant political player. It wants to have a civilian face in power, but the military will be calling the shots once again, as it has done repeatedly in the 50 years or so that Bangladesh has been independent. Military governments in Bangladesh have not been friendly towards India. In fact, military governments in Bangladesh have helped turn Bangladesh into a haven for anti-India forces, including Pakistan's ISI, even giving space to China to work against India from Bangladeshi territory. So all this is not good news. This is in fact quite a setback for India. The fact though is that India has to play its cards carefully. It has to pursue a very cautious approach because a stable and economically growing Bangladesh is very much important for Indian interests. A destabilized Bangladesh would be a nightmare for India's security. And therefore, India has to work with whichever government takes office in Dhaka. Even if it's the army chief who's calling the shots, India has to build rapport with the army chief, General Zaman. General Zaman became the army chief only barely 6 weeks ago. And in 6 weeks, he has, in a de facto sense, engineered a dramatic political change in the country because the army watched quietly as the protests turned into riots, and the rioters then began attacking public infrastructure, attacking the Hindu minority. They began burning hospitals and ambulances and educational institutions and government offices. The army allowed the situation to reach a point of no return. The situation reached to a point where the police and the paramilitary could no longer contain the widespread looting and arson.
And whether they stood there just watching silently or were they party to it, that's really the doubt that's being raised right now as well. That perhaps they orchestrated this, perhaps they executed all of this plan that was scripted somewhere else outside of Bangladesh altogether.
Well, the army chief, through deliberate inaction, created a situation that led him then to go to the Prime Minister and order her resignation and departure from the country. So there was a plan behind the inaction. The inaction was deliberate. And unfortunately, now that General Zaman is now in the saddle, this is not good news for India and certainly not good news for Bangladeshi democracy. Right now, these opposition elements are celebrating the departure of Hasina The fact is that military rule will be harsh for Bangladeshi civil society, and we don't know what kind of government, interim government will take office. What we know is that the main party, the largest party in Bangladesh, Awami League, has not been invited by General Zaman to these discussions on forming the interim government, which indicates that what we will see is the revival of Islamist and hardline forces in Bangladesh that are very inimical to Indian and Western interests. So I think when we go a year back and then look at how the Biden administration began threatening to slap sanctions on the Hasina government, that hard line towards Dhaka made little sense, because this was against America's own long-term interests. It was against the interests of the West, against the interests of India. It only encouraged the anti-Hasina political forces in Bangladesh, especially the BNP and Jamaat. And now we are faced with a situation where the US and India both are not in a position to influence developments within Bangladesh in a meaningful way, and therefore India in particular has to be very careful and cautious.
Absolutely. And Raymond Wickery, as far as United States is concerned, you know, like I said right at the beginning, they've been vocal about Sheikh Hasina and the allegations that have been made against her and her 15-year rule. But like Brahmachalani was also pointing out, and if there is a pro-China or a government that's tilted towards China, that's not in the interest of the United States either. So is this something that they did not see coming? Also, given that it's election here, elections for the next president or for the White House is going to happen in just a few months from now. How do you think that's going to play out as far as the United States is concerned?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I think the basic lesson here for the United States and India, and indeed all democracies around the world, is the fragility of democracy and the importance of having institutions which protect that democracy, rather than looking at one person as being the total imprimatur of the state. Years ago, when I was Assistant Secretary of Commerce, I had dinner with Sheikh Hasina, and I wanted to talk about economic development, what might be done to increase prosperity. The Sheikh only wanted to talk about the past and what had happened to her father and how terrible it was and how revenge was necessary. And I think that a lesson here, in addition to democracy and not looking just to one person, is having a government which can look to the future rather than being concentrated on the past. Now, that having been said, obviously in a chaotic situation like this, there are going to be a lot of conspiracy theories about what is going on and trying to excite the system, if you will, in terms of outside interference. I would say, and I'm not a spokesperson, obviously, for anyone, I'm just speaking for myself, I would say that it's perfectly part of the Biden administration and U.S. policy to stand shoulder to shoulder with India in regard to China and in regard to radical Islamic terrorism. So those things we work together on, and we have made a lot of progress, not only in what happens with Bangladesh, but what happens in around the world and in the region. So I think that this is a time not for trying to get conspiracy. Obviously, China, obviously, extremists are going to be involved in trying to make the most of this situation. But there are elements for stability. I think Minister Jaishankar had it absolutely right when he says we can't be, he's speaking of course for India, can't be involved in trying to look like we're controlling the situation. And so what we can do together, the United States and India, is paramount, I think, in U.S. policy, and looking at a common concern about China and a common concern about terrorism.
And that concern is very real. Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, I thank you for your patience. But you know, as far as India is concerned and the security threat that looms right around the corner, we have a border over 4,000 kilometers with Bangladesh. The border is already porous. And if there is the involvement of China, that is a definite part and parcel of this entire coup, so to say, that we saw in Bangladesh. What are the risks that India needs to now look at?
Thank you, Poonam. You know, turmoil in Bangladesh is definitely not good for India. India wishes Bangladesh prosperity, and a stable Bangladesh, a democratic Bangladesh, is in the interest of India and also in the interest of the entire world. But unfortunately, ever since 1971, Pakistan hadn't reconciled to the fact that Bangladesh, for regions of its identity and not being able to pull along with Punjabi Pakistan, so they decided to have a Bengali Bangladesh. So it was basically the language that drew them into making a country of their own, and a different thing, and they somehow did not gel with it. However, Pakistan always had Jamaat-e-Islami and the ISI links quite strong in Bangladesh, and slowly and steadily. Bangladesh is, if I may say, is a little polarized society with very strong affiliations with Awami League, with very strong affiliations with the BNP and Jamaat-e-Islami, and virtually, I would say 30% of each of these. So that, and as a result of which, whenever BNP government in power, it's anti-India. Jamaat-e-Islami, in any case, an instrument of Pakistan, being orchestrated by ISI, funded by ISI, and now obviously with Pakistan sleeping with China, China obviously helping and assisting it. Because China now has some other interest in Bangladesh. 80% of the military equipment of Bangladesh is Chinese, be it fighter aircraft, be it submarines, be it frigates, be it tanks, be it personal weapons. So a sizable chunk of it. The President-Chief also is inclined, is pro-Chinese, though he's a relative of Sheikh Hasina. Now, having said that, USA also had interest, because USA tried very hard to see that they could have a hold in the St. Martin Islands, not very far from Cox's Bazar, not very far from Myanmar's Coco Islands either. So the desire was that the United States tried extremely hard, but somehow Sheikh Hasina wasn't able to, succeed on both of them. So there was a kind of a thing, and therefore the United States also felt that democracy is in danger in Bangladesh, and therefore Sheikh Hasina mustn't come to power. So all of this working together with projects of China, the bridge on Padma costing about $3 billion, the railway lines coming through, the equipment coming through, Bangladesh seeing almost 8% growth in about 10 years' time, lifting about 25 million people from poverty. All of that was working well. But somewhere the development wasn't seen in the correct perspective, and the word used like Razaka, which in my view, absolutely right, because the Jamaat-e-Islami are the ones creators of Razaka, who did what they did in 71 to the Bangladeshis themselves, and have been ruthless with the Bangladeshis. And however, Pakistan Army, despite having raped 1 million Bangladeshi women, despite that, you find a sizable amount of support still with it. And of course, a small chunk of the Bangladesh or then East Pakistan officers, army officers, were in West Pakistan, who came back to after the creation of Bangladesh and created what they did. Khaleda Zia has all along been. Now, Tariq Rahman, her son, has always been India out campaign. So there's a hate India, there's sort of a lobby which works. And now you have Mohammed Yunus also not very much inclined, and that's my personal view towards it. He has his own views. He a good man, a Nobel laureate, nothing to do. But when it comes to East, our own Northeast, we need to now ensure that there is no, mass migration, because the CAA allows Hindus to come back to India should they find
Absolutely.
themselves
Absolutely, and that kind of concern has been raised by many parties, many politicians, many security agencies along these borders, along the states at the Indo-Bangladesh border as well, and that threat is extremely real. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time, but Nadeem Kadir, I want to give you the last 30 seconds. What is your hope?
Okay.
What in the near future, as far as Bangladesh is concerned, how do you think this kind of unrest, this kind of turmoil is finally going to end?
No, well, in the future, one cannot predict anything in future. Bangladesh has been a very politically volatile country since its birth, and it was born, with a lot of blood, fighting Pakistan. So one cannot say what will happen, but it all depends now that we can only wait and pray that whatever happens in the coming days will shape the country up for some in a better position, and how the new leadership, how the students. I'd just like to add here something very important for you, that I think New Delhi must also should feel the pulse of the people as far as India is concerned and its policies about Bangladesh. That would make life easier for New Delhi in dealing with any new administration that comes in.
And it's not just instability in Bangladesh. That kind of instability could make the entire region unstable, and that's something that India has to also ensure and keep on its mind as far as developing its policies in the future are concerned. Unfortunately, I'm out of time, but I thank you all gentlemen for joining us here on this broadcast and sharing your perspective. We are going to stick with Bangladesh though, because it seems like a deja vu of the 1970s when Bangladesh saw the deadliest of bloodbaths post the Liberation War. In another political and civil disruption that we've seen over the last few weeks that reached a hilt over the weekend, this was against the quota system. We saw the protests eventually